everybody to earthday.org's fourth volunteer workshop in our series on citizen engagement and how everyday people can come together to restore our Earth. My name is Evan Raskin. I am earthday.org's National Campaign Manager. I am joined by our Legislative Director, David Mecker, and Dan Shee, the Political Director of the PIRGs. We're all really excited to be here with all of you today, and we've got a great presentation in store for you on the subject of citizen advocacy and how individuals and organizations can join forces for us to be able to influence our elected officials from the town hall to Capitol Hill. Halsey, let's go ahead and pull up the presentation and get started, why don't we? As we mentioned, welcome everybody. I'm so excited to be here with you today. Let's go ahead and start with a little bit of background on earthday.org and what we do here. So our mission here at EDO is to diversify, educate, and mobilize the environmental movement to restore our Earth through the synthesis of community, technologically, and naturally based solutions. Together, we have grown the movement over the last 51 years to create a global movement. Initially started by students, the Earth Day movement has grown across the nation and across the world to be participated by over 1 billion people worldwide every year on April 22nd. But as we like to say, every day is Earth Day. And below, we will see some more reasons why. Let's go ahead to the next slide. As I mentioned, 2021's theme was Restore Our Earth, focusing on how we can come together to create a future that is not only sustainable, but also prosperous for all. Our solutions focus on making sure that no communities are left behind and that we can use every resource available to us across sectors to build a stronger, more sustainable, more equitable world. And one way that is most important for us to be doing this is through advocacy. Some of the biggest changes we can make come from influencing our policymakers to make changes ranging from the local level to the state to federal. Let's go ahead to the next slide. I'll turn it over now to Dan, who is joining us from the Student PIRGs, one of the largest bases of grassroots and top-down support that we have in the environmental movement. Dan's been doing some really excellent work in the political sector of the environment and has some really great expert knowledge to share on how we can all follow suit and be part of this movement. Take it away, Dan.
Thanks so much, Evan. So that's my info there. That's my Twitter account. Feel free to follow me there for all the latest on the youth environmental movement. I work at the Student PIRGs, which stands for Public Interest Research Groups. We were started a year after earthday.org, so 1971, also by students. Basically young people looking around them and going, wow, how do I actually participate in the political process in an effective way? And so as the National Political Director, my role is to help young people across the country actually run effective political campaigns, including advocacy campaigns. So as an organization, we're in more than 20 states across the country. And we also host Youth Earth Week every single year around Earth Day. This last year, we had more than 250 events run by students during that week. So I'm excited to talk to y'all about the lobbying that our students have done. And really, this is student-led. So this is like 18 to 21-year-olds doing all this work. So if you're watching this going, man, I don't have a lot of experience, this sounds kind of intimidating, just know that I did lobby days like this when I was 19 and was successful. So you absolutely can do it as well. So let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about what lobbying is. So if we take a look here, this is the top here is the Michigan Student Government Association on their statewide lobby day a few years ago. A lot of lobbying now is remote and you can do it virtually. So this is our North Carolina students meeting with a state representative. So I would categorize lobbying as anytime you're meeting with a decision maker and asking them to support your position on an issue. So this could be an elected official, it often is, but it also could be someone at your campus. It could be a bureaucrat that works in government. It could be someone who leads a business or leads a corporation. So if they have decision-making power, you're asking them to do something and you're doing it in a meeting, that's lobbying. So if you think that someone will agree with you on the merits and facts, that's a good reason to meet with them. So maybe they need to hear the facts from you and they will actually take the action that you want. You may do a lobby meeting to get preliminary information. So just to find out where the elected official's at and find out what it would take for them to get to do the thing that you're asking. And then finally, if you already know those two things, you may do a lobby meeting to leverage your outside pressure and actually bring in the petitions or photo petitions or phone calls or business sign-ons, the work that you've done in the district or in the state, to show them what's happened, to push them to actually do the right thing. So I think those are the three primary reasons you may set up a lobby meeting. So again, those are to, one, just figure out, where they're at. Two, to just ask them, maybe they don't know the facts. And three, to bring your outside pressure in so that they actually will take action. Lobbying, I think, is really important because it's where the game is played. All of our opposition on environmental issues certainly has lobbyists. If you look at the climate movement, for example, oil and gas and a lot of those, basically everyone on the energy side, they're like 3-to-1. 3 lobbyists per member of Congress. And so it's really important that our elected officials actually hear from citizens and hear from organizations so that we can actually counter that force on the Hill or in your state capitol. And I think it's also important because our decision makers are just busy people. So it may be the case that they actually agree with you, or they haven't heard a lot about it, and you just bring the issue to the forefront. You think about what our elected officials are in charge of, and it's everything from higher education to how our transit system is set up to how retirement funds are set up, right? Any one human or one office is going to have competing priorities, and so lobby meetings can help bring those issues to the forefront. So let's go to the next slide. I did want to note that when it comes to lobbying, the outside game is typically more important than the inside game. Very rarely will be the case that an elected official goes, wow, I just have never heard of this. What a great point. I shall do what you have asked me to do, right? More often than not, they have heard a little bit from both sides and just need a little more pressure to do the right thing. And so when you get petition signatures from the district, or you get teachers from your district to sign on, or you get the media to actually report on something that you're doing, that's all outside game. That's the stuff that you can bring to your lobby meeting to make it that much more effective. And so I would think of lobbying as sort of the tip of the spear, so to say, and everything on the outside game is the sort of person that's like pushing it forward. I'll come up with a better parallel that's less aggressive for the next overview, just thinking about that. All right, let's go to the next slide. So when you are lobbying, what are the goals? So here's a photo of our students on their national lobby day that we do in February in DC each year. Couple of things you want to get out of the meeting. One is to convince them to support your issue. This one's pretty obvious and probably the one that you're like, yeah, of course. Two is to build credibility, access, and influence with the decision maker. So if you're representing a local group or you're representing yourself on the issue, the more credibility you have, the more they recognize your name, the more likely they are to actually listen to you. So for example, if someone waves at me on the street and they're from Sierra Club, I'm like, cool, I'm likely to sign your thing because I know who you are. I've heard of you and I generally support what you do and I give you money, right? But if you're a group that I've never heard of, I'm gonna go, okay, let me just Google this to make sure I agree with what you say, right? The same is true for elected officials. If you're with your local group that it represents teachers or represents firefighters or represents small business owners, if they see you multiple times and recognize you as credible, then you're more likely to actually get in the door and have them listen to you. So you don't want to burn bridges, you want to build relationships. And then three, you want to educate them about your organization if you represent one. Okay, so how do you think about the principles for these? So let's go to the next slide. I'm talking a lot because I just think it's so much better than putting it on the slide, because then you've got to listen to the words I'm saying. All right, so here's one of our students meeting with Congressman Pallone's office in DC. Here are the principles to actually preparing for your lobby meeting. One, be confident about your position, but don't dismiss the opinion of the legislator or the legislator's staff. Because you're there, you represent you're a constituent, they should listen to you. But if they disagree, you don't want to be dismissive because you don't want to burn bridges. Two, treat them with respect and professionalism. Your long-term relationship is important. Three, don't be an expert, and you don't need to be. It's okay, you're a constituent, that's your role. Your role is not expert. Your role is you represent me and I'm your constituent overall. Study and know the basics, certainly, about the issue that you're working on, but it's more important that you just tell them a personal story, tell them how the issue impacts you or the people in their district. And then finally, having united message is critical. So often you'll be doing these meetings with other people in the district, with coalition members, or perhaps your friends or family. That will allow you to actually have a united ask overall. You don't want to have multiple or deferring asks in your meeting. Okay, let's go to the next slide and talk to how to prepare. First is know who you're meeting with. This might be straightforward. But for legislators, you want to think about whether they're in leadership, whether they lead a committee that's particularly relevant for the issue or the bill that you're talking about. Are they important on this issue? Are they seen as a leader? Do they have a position on it? What have they voted on in the past? Have they co-sponsored bills like this before? This can give you an idea of whether they generally are supportive or against. And whether they have specific powers and may advise what you ask them to do. 2 is prepare your personal story. So it's super important that you demonstrate why it's important to you and the district specifically. So often for our students, for example, we'll have them think about how the environment impacts the decisions they're going to make. So some of our students are like, yeah, I'm going to move out from Florida. That's where I live. I'm going to move from Florida because I'm worried about climate impacts. You're going to lose thousands of young people from your district unless you actually make change. So that might be one thing that moves them. On higher education issues, we're like, hey, yeah, this is how it impacts me that I have loans. I'm a small business owner and the red tide has this kind of impact on my business. And this is why you should vote the right way. So how does it impact you? Do you have stories like that you can demonstrate? 3, organize your delegation. So I think, 3 to 5 people is kind of the max you want to have in these meetings. Any more, they kind of feel like I'm a tour guide that's dealing with all these people, right? 3 to 5 is good because then you can have an intimate conversation about where the legislator stands on it. Typically, I think you'd want a facilitator, to someone to just time check, move the meeting along, take notes on what to follow up on, all that. 2, a recorder. So this is just someone to literally take all of the notes for everything that's happening in the meeting. And this person really shouldn't say anything. So I'm often the recorder for my students. They'll lead the lobby meeting, and I'm just like they're typing a lot. And then lastly, a personal storyteller. So someone who's like there for the personal story. If you have more folks, you could have someone who's on just to talk about the issue and give the facts on that. And then someone else who's on to invite the legislator or the legislator's office to a meeting that you might have coming up. So those are some thoughts on organizing your delegation. And then finally, bring your outside game. So if you wrote a letter to the editor on the issue and you got it printed, you can print that out and bring it. If you're doing a virtual lobby meeting, have that link ready so you can drop it in the chat. If you collected petitions, print those out to bring them. So anything that you got in the outside game, bring those so you can deliver it to the elected official or their office when they arrive. Okay, here's a sample of an agenda once you've actually set the whole thing up. 1, introductions and review agenda. I always do a time check here. These are busy folks, so it's good to just go, how long do we have? And sometimes it's 15 minutes, sometimes it's half an hour. If you get lucky, it's 45 minutes. And that way you can make sure that the time checker or the facilitator keep the thing on time. 2nd is thank them. Ideally, you can thank the office or the legislator on a good vote that they had or a co-sponsorship they had. But sometimes you meet with elected officials that really haven't done anything good on the issue that you're working on. It does happen, in which case you just want to thank them for taking the time to actually meeting with you and your group. 3, ask about their priorities. So this is just good to figure out what their office cares about first, especially on the issue that you are lobbying them on. 4, present the issue that you're lobbying about. Give them a quick overview of the problem, the solution, and what you want them to do. And then ask for their support specifically. You want to have a really clear and hard ask. Will your boss vote yes on this? What will it take for your boss to vote yes on this? Get that answer, because that will advise what you'll do once you leave that meeting and how you run your campaign afterwards. Will your boss co-sponsor? That's another thing that you might ask for them to do. 6, repeat for any other additional items. I have definitely met with elected officials where I have like 5 asks. I'm like, I know that you support us on these issues, so I just want you to co-sponsor these 5 bills. And then they go, sure, let me ask about this one. And that's okay too. You just want to repeat 4 through 5 to do that. And then finally, before thank them, I would say follow up on anything that you need to. Say, okay, I'll get you this. Sometimes they'll go, I won't vote yes until I know this stat. Or I'll vote yes if you can demonstrate to me that small businesses in the district care about it. And so you just want to follow up and say, I'm going to get you those sign-ons, and then thank them for the meeting, and you can leave from there. And I would put the personal story in number 4, so presenting about the issue you're lobbying about. So you may say, here are the hard facts. And then actually, Evan has a great story about how it impacts him. And then you may have 1 or 2 personal stories after you present the facts from there. Okay, so here are a couple protocol things just to know about. One is be on time or early. Sometimes for Zoom ones or digital ones, you'll find out link issues, and those are just good to catch earlier. On time or early in person, often, like, I get lost, especially on Capitol Hill. Those buildings are confusing, so it's just good to schedule your meetings with a gap time. Turn your cell phones off. You don't want those to be distracting. Look professional. I work with students, so we always have to get people to be like, do you have a suit jacket from speech and debate in high school? Okay, put that on. But you want to look professional for the meeting. Do not lie. This may seem straightforward. I don't think anyone goes into a lobby meeting thinking they are intending to lie. But sometimes you'll get asked a question like, hey, what's the stat on percentage of people in the district that do this? You don't want to say, oh, I think it's more than what you're saying. It's way better to just go, I don't know. Let me look that up. I'll get back to you, than to actually take a guess at it. You lose credibility so quickly, and it's so hard to gain. Gain it in drops, lose it in buckets, right? The next is Walt, have ears. This is more for in-person, but you don't want to talk trash or talk about your meeting in between your meetings, especially if you're, at a state or national legislative building, right? You're like in an elevator or you're walking to lunch. You don't want to be like, oh, that staffer was such a jerk, right? Because their colleague might be right next to you, or an elected official might be right next to you. So you just want to assume that you're being recorded, or that there's someone that works for a paper right next to you the whole time. Stay on message. We've mentioned this before, but the best way to do this is just practice and memorize, and make sure your whole team has practiced before you go into the meeting. And then finally, Capitol schedules change. So if you are doing a state lobby day and you have a couple meetings, or a federal lobby day with a couple meetings, you do just want to be ready for a staffer to call you and be like, hey, can we meet 15 minutes later or 20 minutes earlier, or do you have time at 5? That's totally normal. They're very busy. Press opportunities come up, votes come up, and so you just want to be flexible with your schedule. Okay, next page. Size of your delegation, we already talked about this. Second is state issues directly. I hinted at this before by saying, what will it take to get you to vote on this? You just want to say things really clearly so you can get that clear answer. And ask staff to do the same for you. If a staffer is like, oh, my boss really cares about the environment, don't worry. That's not direct, right? You want to say, that's great, but will they vote yes on this bill? That's great, but will they fight this bad amendment? And so that way you can get a clear yes or no answer on where they stand. 3 is listen. A lot of these meetings are about info gathering. Ideally, they just tell you what they need, right? Ideally, you come out of the meeting and they say, look, if you get in the press 10 times, like, we'll probably vote yes on it. You're like, great, thank you for telling me what I should do for the next month before the vote. That's ideal. So you should just listen so you can get those. Same for asking for specifics. Hey, I need small business support. You may go, cool. Like, do you want us to bring them to a lobby meeting? Do you want us to get a sign-on letter? Do you want us to write letters to the editor with them? What do you think? What would be the most effective or influential for your boss? That is the best way to get the intel you need. Keep it short. So you don't want to go on a whole diatribe about the facts of the problem or how the solution will impact the district. You can bring 2 punchy facts, and the thing that they're going to remember is that personal story. They get lobbied all the time. They get told facts all the time. The most important thing is that they remember, like, oh, wow, that really impacts real people in the district. So many times they're lobbied by industry people or not real people from their district. So that personal story is the thing that's going to make you and your meeting stand out. I said memorize. Next is staff are just important. It's easy to go, oh, I didn't get to meet with the legislator. I'm meeting with the staffer, and go, oh, that sucks. It doesn't matter. But actually, they're just as important, right? They're the gatekeepers that actually get all the information to their bosses. And whether they actually present that in a way that's really compelling depends on relationship and you're meeting with them. So it is really important to, make friends with the scheduler for the office, to make friends with even, the junior staffer who takes all the miscellaneous issues, because they could make a case for it down the line as well. And then finally, be aware of false dichotomies. There are times when elected officials or offices will say, look, we can't vote yes on this because that means that we have to vote no on this other thing, right? It is not your job to help elected officials choose between two things in a budget or choose between trading off two issues. It is your job to make the case that your thing is the most important. And so don't get sucked into those when they're like, oh, but what do we do about this other thing? My answer is always, look, it's up to you. What I can tell you is that this particular issue I'm bringing to you is important for your district, and here's why. So don't get sucked into those false dichotomies. All right, I've got a last slide on digital tips for digital lobbying, and then I'll pass it over to the Earth Day folks. So digital tips, we this last year did all virtual lobby days. We had 120 students at our first lobby day in November of 2020, and another 80 on our federal lobby day in February. And we did state lobby days. This one is from a California statewide lobby day on 100% renewable energy, and another 500 students on those just all over the country. The key thing for virtual lobby days, one is test and share links beforehand. This may seem obvious, but you want to create that calendar link with the Zoom for everybody the week beforehand, and then test them all the night before. We've had so many snafus with those. 2 is matching backgrounds and signs. So if all 3 of you come in with your ask as your background, that will also be really memorable and different than a lot of the other lobby meetings they get. And then 3, use video to demonstrate your field game. So if you did do work in the district, you can show a little video, which you typically wouldn't do if you were doing a lobby meeting. You wouldn't be like, let me whip out my laptop. Look at this video we made, right? But you can totally do that, and it's very appropriate in a virtual setting if you're doing a lobby day. So those are all my tips on lobbying. And then we've got some more follow-ups that I think are really, really good advice from Evan and David from here. I'll pass it back over.
Thank you so much, Dan, for providing this framework and all these great tips. I'm already learning so much from just what we've covered so far. And I hope that everybody out there in the audience is starting to see that lobbying isn't just for the suits on Capitol Hill. It's something that we can all really participate in. And one question that might be on your minds is, where and when are these opportunities forming? David, when and where can individuals like us get involved in lobbying?
It's a great question, Evan. And I think what's really important to personify here is the difference between being able to take action in your state or in your city, local area, or taking action on the Hill. And so for one example, if you're looking to rally people around a specific bill that is currently going through a floor vote or is in committee being discussed, it's a great time to try to schedule a meeting with a staffer and try to get as many co-sponsors, as many votes as you can. But that being said, like Evan said, lobbying is a lot more than just meetings and power suits at the Capitol building. In fact, there's an old saying that in the end, all politics are actually local. So attending events that you can expect your House rep or your senator to attend, like parades, picnics, coffee hours, town halls, anything that might just be happening in your area are really places where you can establish a really deep connection with your member by just showing that you're a power player in your area. So events that they're going to be attending can typically be found on their website, or also just by simply calling their office. A lot of the interns answering the phones usually have some good information on when they will be making appearances in their district. Another huge thing that you can do is join your target's mailing list. This is something that they'll typically send out maybe a weekly newsletter, just letting you know where they'll be, and you can plan accordingly. I think we're good for the next slide.
Absolutely. One more thing I want to mention before we move on, building off of what David said, is that, yes, representatives and legislators, they're especially attuned to the needs and goings on in their home district. And I think it's really important and powerful to remember just how much can be accomplished on this level. The ways that the environment is most directly modulated, that happens on a local level, and being able to get your hands in that soil is how you can really grow the movement. Let's move on to the next slide. So email and phone, two tools at our disposal that are more important than ever. As Dan mentioned, most of lobbying and advocacy right now is going on in digital formats. And a great way to establish your presence and work towards building these direct sit-downs and meetings is through email and phone contact, building up a rapport and becoming known. As Dan mentioned earlier, when someone's name or organization can be easily recognizable, it makes those who we want to listen to us more willing and able to hear us. Is there anything that either of you would like to share on this topic?
I'll just note one of my first campaigns as a student was getting a state elected official to vote yes on the first climate bill in the country in California. They were very much like, oh, we support this, but it's not the right time. And we scheduled phone calls every 15 minutes for a whole week during business hours into their office, which really wasn't that much time, you know? And day 2 of this, they were like, please stop the phone calls. I will do what you want. Because their staff like pick up the phones, like real people pick up the phones, especially in local offices. And they were like, I literally can't do my job because I'm getting a phone call every 15 minutes. And so it's huge, very, very effective. And a lot of times, I think at the federal level, they get a lot of calls. But if you're working to get your city council or your mayor to do something, they just don't get calls at all. So if you can generate like 20 calls, that'll probably freak them out.
Oh, yeah, most certainly. When you have this inundation of emails and phone calls, it identifies you and the issue areas that you want to discuss as being key players in that representative's area of dedication. It shows that this is what their constituents are interested in.
And not only that, but I mean, one point that Dan had just made is that, yes, federal offices tend to get a lot of calls. But that being said, the constituents' messages are still always recorded and typically reported to the legislator. So getting a massive amount of volume on one issue is something that will reach their ear if you get enough calls in.
Yes, those metrics stand out. Let's go ahead to the next slide. It's important to understand what the right amount of time range is when discussing how to form a plan with a representative. We have to remember what the types of priorities that these representatives have in terms of their term. It is really important to have a short-term solution or ask to be able to get the ball rolling. If you can win over the hearts of the representatives and legislators that you want to reach, they're more likely to take action still once they have a clear idea of what step 1 is, how to move from point A to B to C to Z. The more that we can break down barriers to action while uplifting the benefits, that's when we really see things starting to build momentum. Elucidating what steps can be taken in the here and now to start making an impact is really critical rather than just putting off these issues to a later date. And it's important to remember that in the context of legislation, short term can last as long as years. So you have some room as far as to what these terms can be defined by. David, would you like to elaborate on this at all?
A little bit, but I think you hit the nail quite right on the head. So for example, earlier Dan was talking about having your list of asks ready to go and make sure they're short and simple. So this, for example, can be a list of 5 different pieces of legislation that you'd like them to co-sponsor, to vote yes on. But those can also be seen as just here and now goals. At the same time, you can still build out a long-term strategy that incorporates those bills, but at the same time, those can be seen as stepping stones. So for example, if you're trying to build a goal that includes establishing an office at a certain department, you can still find wins, like, for example, trying to build some actual, trying to build some programs that are already in that department to the point that they see that they actually need a centralized area to establish all this work. And I think that's about all I've got on this one.
When developing these timelines, as David was describing, it's also really important to remember the nature of these legislators' jobs. If there is an election on their horizon, what actions can they take before that time to be able to make an impact and demonstrate to their constituents that this is an issue that they take seriously. Being able to leverage that is very powerful, as appealing to the interests of one's voters is not only in the job description of these legislators, but it's also the method by which they keep them. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. The 80-20 rule. I think that this is a really excellent rule, not only in the realm of lobbying and citizen advocacy, but in management and really communicating with others in general. The more that we limit the amount of time that we speak and really focus on listening and making those that we want to reach feel heard, that goes such a long way to making a difference and bridging the gap between what we want to communicate and what we want to be heard. In that nature, I would like to keep things short and sweet on my end and pass it over to Dan and David to give any thoughts that they may have.
Well, I did have another example on your last slide. Just so like a lot of our lobby meetings locally right now are to get the city to ban all single-use plastics. But they're often not ready for that. So when we go in the lobby meetings, we say, look, eventually we'd like you to ban all single-use plastics because they're bad. You can start by banning straws, or you can start by banning straws at city events. And so it just gives them like a little tidbit to move forward. Same on climate, where a lot of our lobby meetings are like, look, we want you to go 100% renewable energy. That's what it's going to take. But right now, you can make sure that the new fleet of buses for the school system is electric. What about that? And so you've got that vision, but then your short term is like a smaller ask that may be more tenable right now.
Oh, that's an excellent example, Dan. The way that that was just described really shows how we moved the needle over time. All right, let's go ahead and keep moving now. All right, wrapping up. This is a very important part of the meeting. The parts of any interaction that one has, it's the beginning and the end that are going to stick out in people's minds the most. And when concluding your meeting, you want to stay focused, be succinct, and direct about exactly what your goals are from this meeting. If you have an agenda planned out in advance, that will help make sure that you stay on track and stay focused in this regard. Knowing exactly what those top line items that you want your legislator to remember leaving the meeting, having those ready and quickly available at the end of the meeting is going to be key. Always remember to additionally reintroduce yourself at the end of the meeting. Make sure that your name and organization resonates within their heads as they leave this meeting. And to facilitate that, it's really great to also leave behind some materials for your legislator to review as well. Having those physical pieces of text is going to go a long way. Distributing these notes that will allow them to understand what you said rather than just relying on memory. That's how you continue to make that lasting impression. What else can we do to make sure that we wrap up a meeting properly, David and Dan?
So actually, one thing that I noticed in the chat earlier is that there was a really good question from Daniel asking about the effectiveness and regarding the difference between individuals and PACs and how effective they can be. One thing that's really important on wrapping up your meeting is making sure that your leave behinds have a very good sheen to them, I guess if you want to call it that. Mm-hmm. So if you find a PAC as an individual that you think really aligns well with your goals, it's really good to partner with them to have the ability to bring in those leave behinds that have maybe been put together by a marketing team. And I think that's about what I've got on that.
Yeah, I totally agree. Solid graphic design can make all the difference in the world. That can really help turn a piece of ostensibly irrelevant information into something that catches one's interest and makes your legislator want to engage. As we've discussed earlier in this presentation, our representatives are inundated with numbers and figures day in, day out, and have so much data to go through that having some sort of visually striking material that will really catch their interest and move up to the top of the stack, that really helps make sure that eyes actually get on it. And what else can we do to make sure that we leave a lasting impression? Let's move on to the next slide to find out. Following up, if we go back one slide, that would be great, because this is one of the most important things we can do. It's absolutely vital that you follow up after your meeting with a thank you note. We recommend doing this primarily by email to make sure that it is in their hands at an appropriate time. And not only in the sense of decorum is this important, but also just to make sure that you make a lasting impression, that your meeting isn't forgotten about. It really helps to write down, not only for yourself, but also for crafting this follow-up, to have written down your major takeaways, who attended the meeting, and what you plan to do to move this partnership forward into the future.
I'd also recommend just taking a picture or a screenshot, even if it wasn't like the most totally positive meeting, and then tweet it or put it on Instagram and tag them. They'll like that, and it just like demonstrates your power too.
Yeah, absolutely. That also helps take this meeting out of the private eye and appropriately put it into the public one. Being able to use that momentary piece of advocacy and perhaps turn it towards the public who may not yet be aware of what we're advocating for, and bring on new allies that are motivated by the momentum that we've just built. See. Unless there's anything else you'd like to add, David, we can go ahead and move on to the next slide. All good? All right, maintaining the connection, the follow-up to the follow-up. When it makes sense to do so, reach back out and remind your representatives of your existence and your priorities. If they end up supporting your issues and taking action, be sure to thank the office and encourage them to continue to be an ally. Having this kind of positive feedback can really deepen your relationship with an office and a legislator. Knowing that you are an ally to their cause, at least on the specific issue, if things are going the way that you want. Continuing to update them on changes and momentum within the movement is also really great. Sending relevant news articles or issue areas that are emerging can help make sure that your partnership and collaboration develops in a way that makes sense and is actionable. And if there are certain pieces of bill language that you want to bring up, those are also really great. Like we were saying before, breaking down the barriers to action, uplifting the benefit. And remember, again, every time that you get in touch with these people, every time that you want to have this interaction, mark your intention in doing so and know exactly what you want to get out of this interaction. That way there are no wasted words. All right. I believe that wraps up the framework part of our presentation today. I hope that this has all been very helpful for you all. If we turn to the next slide, we can see some ways in which we can continue to develop things, how we can do some follow-up here and now together. One of the best ways that individuals can make sure that they hear about our great opportunities to take up some of what we've learned today and turn it into real action is to become an Earth Day volunteer. You can follow the link that is on screen and we'll be dropping into our chat bars momentarily. Following that link will take you to a sign up to become a volunteer, to be connected to our movement and be the first to hear about our excellent opportunities that we have to be part of the environmental movement. If you're part of an organization that you would like to start creating collaborations with us, either on subjects such as this or ranging across the environmental movement, from cleanups to direct actions to rallies, marches, events and festivals, and digital actions and more, please feel free to reach out to me at raskin@earthday.org, and I would love to discuss partnership with you. You might be wondering, as a partner, what some of the upcoming opportunities you might have available to you are. We continue to have these volunteer trainings every month on topics such as this and more, to learn how all of us can become more effective advocates for the planet that we all share. The next one will be coming up in September. Additionally, in September, we have World Cleanup Day, a really excellent time to get involved and get hands-on in the environment. Personally, cleanups were one of the ways that I first started getting more involved in the environment. And if you're looking for a quick and easy way to make a direct difference, I encourage you to turn out next month. The following month, we'll have a Citizen Engagement Day where we'll really be tapping into the techniques that we've learned here today. David has been doing some great work preparing this, and I'd love to give him a chance to spotlight the event.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Evan. So October 5th is International Teachers Day. And what we are planning on doing is trying to get an established presence across the country to speak to members of the House and the Senate, to have the federal government have a more established presence in helping our youth, K through 12 students, learn more about climate literacy. Any of you take part in this event, all you have to do is sign up at our volunteer page.
All right. I can't wait to see all of you there, because as always, Earth Day is every day. As we continue to have these great events throughout the fall, we'll be continuing to build momentum and enthusiasm, which I don't know if is even possible considering how excited I personally am for Earth Day 2022 coming up on April 22nd. You won't want to miss it because we are just so excited to continue to build the movement, especially as the world begins to recover responsibly from the COVID-19 pandemic. There are going to be more and more opportunities opening up, and we would love to work with all of you to also be self-starters. The way that we're able to, as an organization, go from just a handful of folks in an office in DC to a worldwide movement of environmental activists, volunteers, and passionate folks who care about the planet. It's through the collaboration of people like you who turned in today to learn about what little bit more we can do to make a difference. Thank you guys so much again, and please feel free to stick around for a Q&A, which we'd love to start right now and take some questions from the audience.
I see one from Daniel up here that I'd be happy to talk a little bit more about. Daniel asked, how much more effective is a PAC or group than an individual constituent? And I would say pretty significantly more, but individual, one question I would ask if you're representing yourself or you've got a couple of people in your community is like, what groups do you represent? Like that you are a part of that you could speak for. So for example, you could say, well, look, I'm a retiree. This is why this issue matters to retirees. Or look, I am a former military officer. This is why it matters to my constituency. I'm a teacher. This is why teachers care about this. So like, what are you a part of? And that can give you a little bit more leverage. And if you just look at your like 3 best friends in your town or your city and go, what are we a part of? You probably represent actually a lot more groups than you think you would. So that's one way that you can leverage a little bit more power than, you know, a big PAC or a big nonprofit.
Oh, really excellent answer, Dan. I'd like to take a question from Pamela Haas, who asked, can you speak to the best ways to approach city council mayors and members? And I think that's a really excellent question because these are some of the people that I personally love to work with the most. And to be able to sit down with city council members and mayors, one really great thing you can do is build a coalition of local support to bring with you to the meeting. Like Dan was saying, having just a couple of folks with you, you don't want an entire tour group coming to the meeting, but bringing some key players from the issues you would like to discuss can go a long way. For instance, when I discussed with the mayor of my hometown how to integrate climate literacy into our school system, I brought along with us the head of the school board and the head of the largest environmental nonprofit in the town. And hearing from these individual figures that represent large swaths of the constituency helped build a framework that shows that not only am I coming in to discuss an issue that we'd like the town to take up in earnest, but this is something that people locally living there do care about and would have a direct benefit on the community. It's always really great to be able to do things like this. And if you're interested in this kind of work and bringing local and regional communities together, I really encourage you to sign up to become an Earth Day Regional Coordinator. We'll be sharing a link here in the sidebar to do so. And this is, as I mentioned earlier, one of the best ways that we're able to branch out the environmental movement. Our regional coordinators are some of our best partners to be able to get these meetings going with city council members and mayors and bring together these key players in the communities to create a whole of not only government, but a whole of America, a whole of the planet solutions to climate change, because all of us have separate parts to play when it comes to solving both local and national environmental crises. And identifying and bringing together those individual pieces is how we create holistic solutions.
The other thing I'll note, Pamela, is it just depends on the size of your town. Like if you live in Maine, I ran a campaign in Maine for 2 weeks once, and I was calling just phone numbers on websites. And then I would talk to people like the person's husband who was like, "Oh yeah, the council member's across the street. You've reached her kitchen." I was like, "What?" Because I'd been an organizer in California for years before that. And if you're in LA, like you gotta like do what Evan just described. Is like you gotta bring everything with you to even get access to them. If you live in a medium-sized town, shooting them an email or just showing up to the meeting early, they're often just loitering, and you could just walk up to them and be like, "Oh, hello, can we chat about this thing?" But I would just recommend an email and a phone call. If you don't live in a giant place like LA, you can probably just get a meeting.
Excellent. I see that there's a question from Daniel about what EarthDay.org is doing surrounding citizen science initiatives, planned or in progress. One opportunity I'd love to turn your attention towards is our Global Earth Challenge application. Earth Challenge is one of the largest citizen science initiatives that we can offer here today. And it is all about how we as individuals can record pieces of data that come together to form a large data set that can really influence our understanding of plastic pollution and how to remediate it. So our Global Earth Challenge app is predominantly focused on how individuals are cleaning up trash, what we are finding in the environment, and identifying those point sources that we can hopefully work towards stopping at their source rather than just cleaning up after the fact. We can share a link with you to get involved. I encourage everyone to download this app. It's a really fun way to turn picking up trash into almost a game of sorts. I find that the more I pick up and the more I contribute to this data set, the more I feel like I am making a marginal difference. It's really helped change my perspective on when and where I can get involved in these issues. While it's always really great to see people turning out and organizing formalized cleanups, it's also great to remember that I can make a difference just walking down the street.
Plogging, it's called. If you're running
right,
and you pick it up, it's called plogging. I learned that during Earth Week this year.
Oh yeah, it's a great activity. I'm glad that it's been picking up momentum lately. As a runner myself, it's a great way for me to engage in two of my interests at the same time. All right. See, are there any more questions? David, are there any that you'd like to answer from the set?
I do see an interesting one from the admin on YouTube asking about what our recommended tool for petitions or policy comments from nonprofit groups. This one is actually typically going to depend on whatever group you plan on joining onto their petition. So for example, on Earth Day's website, we've got a link right at the very front allowing you to sign on to one of our petitions, either discussing climate literacy. We've had a couple that talk about the national science standards and also particularly science standards for education in Pennsylvania. We've got one that's a letter to the Global Environmental Facility talking about the need to incorporate more cash flow specifically for local groups. These are actions that I can specifically say towards earthday.org, but the real answer is it's going to depend on what group you plan on signing up with.
Great answer, David. I see another question here that I'd like to answer from Amy on YouTube. She says, I struggle with personal stories. Any suggestions? And I think that's a really great question because not all of us have a specific sort of backstory that we can craft into this environmental narrative that draws from our own personal lives. And if you find yourself struggling to find an example from your own life to bring up in these scenarios, I would recommend doing a little bit of research on what's going on in the environment in your representative's home district. It can be not only a personal story about yourself, but about perhaps the people that you're trying to reach. The idea here really is to drive home these issues and showing that as much as you and I might care about a polar bear on a melting iceberg in the Arctic, for a lot of people, that's a faraway issue that doesn't resonate with their own lives. But the more that we can show that this affects real people, real families, and communities that we are directly involved in, the more empathy we can build for these issues. And doing just a little bit of research on what's happening locally and what will strike a personal chord with the people you want to reach, that can make a world of a difference.
Google can really be your friend here. Like if you Google the elected official or their staffer, you can find out that like they always go to this church, or they're really into fishing, or whatever the thing is. And that can be a good way. Like, I often don't have an immediate stories, but then I can say like, oh yeah, I talked to my friend and they actually say that their church community really cares about this. Or like, one of my really good friends goes fishing every Sunday morning. They go out at 6 o'clock, and like, man, this is really impacting their day to day, that, you know, we actually are dealing with this issue. So you probably have people in your periphery. Like, you probably don't even need to do that much research. Just like sort of ask your friends and family, like, what would happen if this passed? What would happen if it didn't? And you can sort of be the conduit and tell their stories too.
Yeah, that's very insightful. Remembering how many connections we all share in these ways, more than ever now that we, like you said, have the resources of the internet at our disposal. One way or another, I'm sure there's a way to make any issue you'd like to discuss become more local. All right. See, are there any other questions that we'd like to answer today? I think that now would be a great time for us to go ahead and wrap things up. As we discussed earlier, it's always best to be concise and remember exactly what our goals are. Our goals, of course, being to make sure that everybody learns that these types of opportunities for citizen advocacy are open to all. I hope that you're feeling a bit more empowered, as am I, to be able to go forward with this type of work, be a part of the movement, and do so in a way that makes sense. I learned so much today from David and Dan, both of whom have some expert knowledge and really demonstrated to me that it is possible for us to make a difference through elected officials from town hall to Capitol Hill. I look forward to seeing all of you at upcoming volunteer events, especially upcoming in October with our excellent citizen engagement opportunities. Until next time, I'm Evan Raskin with earthday.org, and I can't wait to see you again. Goodbye, everybody.